All right, the last folks I'm going to thank are my fine panel members here. I put on the reading glasses. Um, we've got a really great panel of folks here. One of the reasons I want to thank them is when we're in the middle of all this process of putting together watershed implementation plans and draft TMDLs and executive order strategies, we were seeking folks that were willing to look ahead and volunteer to be sort of what you would call early adopters, the ones that want to be leaders, that are thinking a year or two ahead in the process of when we get the final TMDL, if that indeed is on December 31st, what happens next? What is it gonna mean to me at the local level when it hits the ground, when I need to start implementing it? We had folks from 6 different jurisdictions, counties, watershed associations around the watershed step up and volunteer to undertake pilot projects to look ahead to phase 2, again, which is the purpose of the panel this morning, and figure out, you know, what challenges were there going to be, what could we learn at this early point in the process to pass on to us at EPA, but more importantly to those of you out in the trenches, so that when we get to phase 2, we've got a wealth of knowledge and lessons to learn from. And I will mention that at EPA, in addition to what you'll hear today verbally, we are pulling together a report on lessons learned from these WIP pilots that EPA funded last year, and we'll hopefully be getting that out in the next 4 to 6 weeks, where we'll pull together lessons learned, and we'll make sure to get that to the coalition so you can share that with folks. Sean spoke yesterday about the TMDL at length, and we had a couple of breakout sessions, so beyond reiterating the historic nature of it, I'm not going to get into the details. I want to focus on the phase 2 WIP. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview. To date, EPA has said some things about the phase 2 WIPs. You heard Sean say yesterday it's about making real progress on the ground, getting to local scale, further improving reasonable assurance. And we have said some things in writing about the phase 2 WIPs in our expectations letter of November 2009. In the final TMDL document itself, we've got language about the phase 2 TMDL, WIPs, and we've put together a fact sheet, which again we'll share with you, that sort of pulls what have we said so far about these things, and do we need additional guidance to the states and locals. But I'd say there's 3 primary purposes for the phase 2 WIPs. One, again, is to set these local area planning targets, and I'll get more to that later, but to get down to the local level, whether it's counties, municipalities, watersheds, subwatersheds, conservation districts, getting these statewide WIPs that have basin level nutrient, phosphorus, and sediment allocations down to the local level. Second, it's to make any possible adjustments that might be needed based on changes to the Bay watershed model. We had committed last summer in discussions with the states to make 2 additional changes to the model this winter for nutrient management and urban land use. We're going to limit it to that set of changes and rerun the model and get those adjustments out to the states and locals for their incorporation into the phase 2 WIPs. And the third area is to help us gain greater levels of reasonable assurance in the phase 2 WIPs, particularly in places where we've already had to put backstops, or where we've signaled that there's a potential sort of deferred backstop that could be coming in areas where we have what we call enhanced oversight. So those are sort of the 3 main things. In terms of what we actually have said in writing, we said Bay jurisdictions will be developing phase 2 WIPs that further divide final non-point source and point source target loads using a finer geographic scale, such as counties, conservation districts, subwatersheds, or where appropriate, individual sources or facilities. In particular, federal facilities, I'll mention, they have the opportunity to develop their own implementation plans called FIPS, just to add another acronym out there that you don't need, but that'd be Federal Facility Implementation Plans. We anticipate some of the larger Federal installations like a Fort Meade that's part of the Anne Arundel pilot may be developing their own federal facility implementation plans after they get their planning targets from the states. One of the important things we've also said in our guidance thus far that I want to emphasize is that this idea of what are we giving to the local jurisdictions? Are the allocations, targets? And we've been trying to get away from the word allocations because the allocations are at the state level. Ultimately, the states are the ones that are still responsible for meeting those allocations we set for them under the final TMDL. So what we said in our guidance so far is that EPA expects the local targets to be used for planning purposes and does not intend to establish local targets as separate allocations in the TMDL. So again, what you'll be getting at the local level are planning targets, things that you can shoot for. They will be in the context of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. It'll give you a target, but it won't be an actual allocation per se that you will have a legal binding responsibility to meet. Now, you may build those into county planning documents, other things, and then at the local level, ultimately you could wind up having something binding, but in terms of how EPA is setting them as planning targets, it's important that you understand what our intent is on that as we get to the local level. Last thing I'll touch on real quickly is just the schedule, because people have asked about that. In the public meetings and in the public comment on the TMDL, we heard a lot from local governments and also other local organizations at the public meetings that we needed more time, needed to give them more time to develop the phase 2 WIPs, to work with the states. For the states, we've also gotten requests from Maryland in particular in writing, as Bob Summers mentioned yesterday. The pilots, if anything, have told us how resource intensive, how time consuming it is to develop these WIPs, and they indeed need more time. And as Sean Garvin signaled, Sean Garvin. As Sean Garvin signaled yesterday, you know, we've heard you, we listened to you. We were holding out, sort of saying we want strong phase 1 WIPs, otherwise how can you move to phase 2? We feel we've gotten that, and we also recognize that there's probably more time needed to put together the phase 2 WIPs. So we're going to start having intense discussions about the states, also with CBF to some degree, since it's in our settlement agreement. We've got to talk to them as well, but I think everyone agrees that we need more time to do those right, and I think that's the important thing. So we've got a management board meeting next week, which probably doesn't mean much to most people, but it's assistant secretary level folks in the states and federal office director level folks from the federal agencies to discuss and sort of lay out some options for the principals staff committee. Did I get that right? PSC, that we're meeting with in early February to make a decision on any revisions to the dates. But my expectation is that we will be pushing back the phase 2 schedule to some degree. Just haven't figured out precisely what. So with that, I'm going to finally get to our panel members. Again, I mentioned that we had 6 pilots. There's a diversity in terms of what they addressed, and I'd like to say we crafted that deliberately. Go ahead, Ron. But it turned out there's a full range of pilots from agriculture to urban to federal facility focused pilots, and without getting into all the details, just in the interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and we're just joined by Ron Bowen, who's the director of the Department of Public Works for Anne Arundel County, Maryland. We had 2 pilot projects in Maryland. The second one was in Caroline County, and to discuss that, we're joined by Kathleen Freeman, who's the director of Planning and Codes for Caroline County. We also had a couple of pilots in Virginia as well. Leslie Middleton is here to discuss the Ravenna River Basin pilot in the Charlottesville area. She's the executive director of the Ravenna River Basin Commission. Leslie was also kind enough to come to our October PSC meeting to talk about the results of their pilot project. And we also have Matt Royer from Pennsylvania, who's the director of the Susquehanna Initiative. He's with Penn State Cooperative Extension, serves as the director of the Susquehanna River Initiative. And then we've got Hamid Karimi, who you heard from yesterday as well on the state panel. He's the deputy director at the Department of Environment in DC, and he'll kick off our first presentation talking about stormwater at federal facilities, which was the focus of their project. Thank you.
Good morning. Following George Hawkins and then trying to keep up with him and then cover everything in about 7 minutes as Jim had directed me to do, it kind of reminds me of what my mother used to say. She would say at times, I feel like I'm caught in the wind, don't know to grab my hat or my skirt. And since I can't keep up with George, I'll follow Jim's instruction of covering everything in 7 minutes. My mother often said it all depends on how expensive the hat is. So on that note, talking about the federal facilities in DC is pretty much like talking about the big three in Detroit when they were big. And this picture doesn't do the Fed's presence justice really, because as you walk across the streets and avenues, you see a lot of these little triangles. They're covered with brick. A lot of those things are thousands of them. They are federal land. It doesn't show it here because a lot of them are 50 square feet here, 200 square feet there. That's what we have to deal with. One thing that you will note there, most of these lands are very close to our waterways around Potomac, Anacostia, and I think this, yeah, it does. This is Rock Creek, and here is Potomac, Anacostia, and Washington Ship Channel. To reorient you in where we are in DC, you are somewhere in this area that's sort of mustard yellow. That's a combined sewer area George Hawkins was mentioning. And the balance of it, which is sort of a cream color area, is our MS4. The area that's green over here, there are some of the federal facilities that they are partially directly discharged into the waterways, so they do not go through our MS4 area. To give you the perspective of what the contribution of federal facilities are, feds make somewhere about 27% of the land in DC, but they have only about roughly about 20% of the impervious area. Primarily because when I showed you the previous slide, a good chunk of the land in DC around the rivers are parklands that are pervious. We have a unique relationship with feds. Federal facilities are the second largest landowner in DC, and the only reason they are second is because we are counting our Department of Transportation having to manage all of the streets, alleys, public right-of-way. If we remove that, feds by far are the first landowner in DC. They don't pay taxes for obvious reasons. Some federal facilities are, as I mentioned earlier, they are partially directly discharged into the rivers. And because of the large amount of land that they occupy and the location that they are there, right next to our sensitive areas by the stream, we need to find a way to have them contribute to our commitment under the WIP and TMDL. We have worked with federal facilities for the last 20, 30 years. One general rule that a lot of you may not be aware of, when Congress puts any laws in place for DC, they generally exempt the feds. And federal facilities that go through DC permitting process, if they build a building, they don't have to get a building permit, they don't have to get an electrical permit, plumbing permit, the typical thing that private sectors do. And about 10 years ago, we went through the system and removed their exemption for getting the stormwater management permit. So the only permit the actual federal facilities get in DC is stormwater management permit, and they come through my shop and do that. So we have had this relationship with feds for a long time. And sort of sticking to the schedule that we have here is this, that we work with most of the facilities. We work with the middle level managers. They have very good intentions. They keep on saying, yes, we want to do things that we need to do, but unless it is absolutely required by the law, we cannot request budget authorization to pay. And at times, they try really hard, but when it comes to the bigger issues, and then another issue that many of you that are working for government realize, there is a front-end process for authorization. If you want to build, say, for instance, one of our largest federal facility buildup is the Department of Homeland Security across the river in Anacostia neighborhood. That's hundreds of acres, and it will go on and on for several years. Any type of low-impact development or stormwater management that we would require them to do there, they should have asked for it 5-6 years ago. It's very difficult for us to go right now and tell them, I want you to put green roof on everything, or I want you to do this and that. And that's one of the issues, challenges that we have, that we are hoping with the help of EPA and actual federal facilities themselves and perhaps federal leadership group to help these managers to make sure they have adequate resources to actually do what they are required to do. Another issue that we have is that, as I said, the picture doesn't show it, we have hundreds of federal facilities in DC. Logistically, it's extremely challenging to work individually with each federal facilities. We are looking to have some sort of coordinated effort to make this process a little bit more easy. I don't have hundreds of people to chase each individual federal facilities. We have been working with DOD, which is one of the largest presence in DC, as well as GSA. But there are a lot of smaller organizations that they don't have actually people on site to do stormwater management and things alike. We are hoping to work with individual federal facilities. We are meeting with each one of them on a regular basis. As I said, they come through my shop for getting their permits. We will be helping them to develop their 2-year milestones. And if anything that I would ask for assistance would be to have a coordinated effort. It is, again, very challenging to go to each individual facility. Our attempt to get through either the EPA contractor that they try to help us has been really this. They call, the calls at times are not returned. And again, as I mentioned, many times when the commitments are made, they are caught in the situation of the budget shortfalls, and it's very difficult to pursue something that we know the person that is making the commitment doesn't have the authority in long term to meet that commitment. And I think that's it. And did I meet it? The 7 minutes? Very good. And if there is any question, I'm more than happy to answer that. Thank you.
I think we'll hold our questions to the end. I'm going to ask Ron Bowen to give the first piece of the Maryland. Peter, you had
I didn't touch a button. Okay, an overall quick summary of our stormwater implementation plan strategy. What I'm listing here is basically our core strategy. We've tried to identify for ourselves what are those actions we need to pursue that will provide us the greatest amount of pound load reduction at the least unit cost. And within the context of that, as far as our wastewater treatment plants are concerned, we have 7 of those throughout Anne Arundel County. All of those are obligated to be upgraded to enhance nutrient removal capacity. The design is underway for most all of those facilities. Construction's underway, and we'll probably be working in the year 2016, so they're all completely constructed. Septic systems is another major issue for us to be confronted with in Anne Arundel County. We have a little over 40,000 septic tanks countywide. As it relates to those septic tanks, we've adopted the Maryland strategy that deals with the delivery ratio of nitrogen. And in essence, what Maryland has determined is that any septic system that's within the critical area, 80% of the nitrogen that drains to the drain field itself will find its way to the tidal water. Any septic system that's within 1,000 feet of a non-tidal stream, 50% of that nitrogen that goes to the drain field will find its way to base flow in that stream. And then anything beyond that, 30% delivery. So there's a substantial amount of loading. We're estimating around 880,000 pounds per year of discharge of nitrogen from septic systems alone. Our stormwater retrofits, we're very much focused on an edge of stream kind of strategy as it relates to where we can get this greatest pound load reduction at the least possible cost. It'll involve stormwater outfall restoration as well as the restoration of stormwater management ponds, maximizing to the fullest extent that we can the benefits that can be gained. And then there's the issue of headwater stream erosion throughout Anne Arundel County. All of our 12 delineated watersheds in the county are impaired for sediment load. All of them are biologically impaired also, and that's directly as a result of the significant amount of erosion that's going on within Anne Arundel County. Keep in mind we're in the coastal plain. We have very highly erodible soils throughout the county, and those stream systems have passed their tipping point probably 40, 50 years ago. So we have a lot of stream channel restoration as well as ephemeral channel restoration. This gives you some sense, and I'm going to focus the rest of this on the nature of the stream restoration, because as I pointed out, that's occurring all throughout the county, and we will never meet our sediment impairments unless we can do something to arrest these erosion problems. These are some examples of what these channels would look like. The picture on the left, in some cases, that incision's as much as 15 feet in depth. The system on the right, which we recently reconstructed this system, that probably has about 6 feet in elevation within that system. Now, if you focus on the picture on the left, a following slide here I'm going to come to provides the restoration of that. But one of the key points that I wanted to point out here as it relates to these systems is that our ultimate goals is to restore the stability of the streams themselves, to restore the hydrology within the floodplains of the streams, to restore the biological health of those streams, and ultimately achieve the water quality compliance. Now, if we focus on those stream systems, when we talk about this issue of restoring hydrology, you can imagine at those depths, and you can see there is some perennial flow at the bottom of those, almost all storm events stay contained within those stream systems these days that are eroded this way. And all of that water from almost all storm events is doing a lot of work, widening and deepening these incisions. You can see that the groundwater hydrology has been lost. It's down 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 feet in depth. And as we go to the reconstruction, this is actually that picture that was on the left restored. Our approach to restoring these streams is actually refill the void with a mixture of sand and wood chips. And there's grade control that's built within these stream systems, details of which it's too much to get into with the soundbite of time that's available here. But there's grade control here that basically contains the 100-year storm to prevent the invert of those streams from re-eroding. The overall big picture perspective as it relates to the upgrade of our wastewater treatment plants, we're going to expend somewhere in the order of magnitude of $270 million for those enhanced nutrient removal facilities. Sanitary sewer extensions to pick up septic systems. We're estimating close to $800 million worth of investment. That would take about 20,000 of those septic systems out of service, convert them either to our public sewer systems, to the enhanced nutrient removal facilities, and some other cases where we have dense septic systems out in rural no-plan service areas. We'll actually create cluster systems. We'll gather that septic tank effluent, we'll take it to a point of treatment, we'll treat it to enhanced nutrient removal capability on a community scale basis, and we'll reintroduce that water back to the groundwater system. One of the things to keep in mind in many of those communities where we have these septic systems, where we have perennial flow in the base stream, most of that perennial flow is the septic tank effluent. So that's why it's going to be important for us to reintroduce that water that's been cleaned up into the groundwater system. We're estimating roughly $400 million worth of stormwater retrofits that we'll pursue, and about another $400 million within the idea of restoring these headwater streams. We've already delineated over a couple hundred miles of that kind of problem throughout the county. I guess on another day, a very interesting, unique technique and approach to restoring those things that perhaps we can share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Now we'll hear from Leslie Freeman on Caroline County.
Kathleen, great.
All right, okay, Kathleen. Thanks, Leslie.
Good morning. Let's see, what I planned on doing is very similar to what Ron Bowen's presentation was, but I wanted to start off with giving you a little bit of information and background about Caroline County. For those of you who don't know much about Caroline County, we are a rural county on the eastern shore of Maryland. We are predominantly agriculture, so we made up the agricultural pilot for Maryland's program. 78% of our land is agricultural, 14% residential, 16% public lands, and then on down from there. The population of Caroline County is about 34,000. We have 10 incorporated towns, for which the populations range from 46 people, yes, 46, to 3,500 people. So our incorporated jurisdictions are about the size of maybe a medium major subdivision on the western shore. So that brings to Caroline County and the rural counties, I think, a whole new set of challenges that you can imagine. In addition to the 10 incorporated jurisdictions, Caroline County does have what we call a growth area. It is a transferable development rights receiving area, and it is right in the center of the county, right around there. And that's another area that we know through this process that we're going to have to be focusing on because we don't have wastewater treatment facilities treating those properties. Back in July of last year, we had received draft targets from the state of Maryland, and this has sort of guided our approach and goals that we've been looking into through the process. The two highlighted in red, the minor municipal and agriculture, are our focus areas for Caroline County for the phase 2 WIP. Although you can see on the percent reduction, minor municipal wastewater treatment facilities have to reduce by 40%, agriculture by 13%. If you look at the actual target load in millions of pounds, agriculture is vastly larger than the wastewater treatment plants. Also, I should mention in Caroline County, we have 3 minor wastewater treatment plants and 2 majors. And the remaining 5 jurisdictions are all on well and septic, even within the incorporated limits. So for our implementation strategies and goals, for the agriculture, real briefly, we are looking to continue and maintain existing BMPs. What we found through the process is that agriculture is doing its part in Caroline County. They've done a lot. One of the lessons we've learned is that there are voluntary BMPs being put on farms in Caroline County that are not being tracked and recorded, and that's one of the challenges that we'll be facing is how do we capture those. It's proprietary information, and we can't access it, sometimes not even with the Public Information Act request. So that's a big issue for us. And of course, we'd like to add new BMPs whenever the possibility and opportunity is there for us. For septic systems, as I mentioned, the county's TDR receiving area is all on well and septic. We know we have to reduce our septic system loads, so that will be something we'll be looking into. We're hoping to work more cooperatively with the jurisdictions that have wastewater treatment facilities and put our transferable development rights in those towns as opposed to in the rural area of the county where the facilities don't exist. And in the most sensitive places, as Ron Bowen spoke to also, along the critical area, we'll be looking to put in the denitrifying systems to lessen that impact. The minor point sources in Caroline County, we have been working for more than 10 years now on a regional wastewater treatment facility to serve the 4 towns in the northern portion of the county. This is our primary minor point source strategy and goal for our phase 2 WIP. A 5th town has also come on board for that project. They have an existing minor wastewater treatment facility that is discharging sometimes as much as 40 milligrams per liter of nitrogen into the Choptank River, which is huge if you know anything about wastewater treatment facility discharges. With the collection and conveyance and an ENR treatment plant to serve those 5 towns, we will meet our minor point source goal. We are well on our way to receiving the funding for that project, and very hopeful that phase 1 implementation, or actually on the ground treatment, will begin as early as 2013. For developed land, we did have 2 jurisdictions working with us throughout this process, and we're hoping to reach out to the remaining 8 about improving environmental site design requirements and codifying those both in the towns and in the county. And we'll be looking to do stormwater retrofits for existing development also. Our process, we started with our water resources element. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, in the state of Maryland, there was legislation that called for counties and other jurisdictions to have a water resources element as part of their comprehensive plans. And what that included was an assessment of your non-point source nutrient load by land use, non-point source BMPs, point source nutrient loads, and nitrogen loads from septic systems. What it did not include was a goal at the end of the day. So we did an assessment, we didn't have a goal. That, to us, in Caroline County, was the primary difference between the phase 2 WIP and our WRE, is now we have some goals that we're looking for. So the information we've already gathered has been critical and will continue to be critical for us. In addition to this, we have already developed a EPA 319 watershed plan that covers 60% of Caroline County. It's already approved, or it was just recently approved, I should say, while we were going through this process. So we feel like we were in a very good position as things were moving forward to be a pilot county because of the information that we'd already collected. And also towards that end, we already had a watershed planning work group assembled. When we began with the phase 2 WIP, we did not include all the stakeholders. We asked them to keep moving forward with the watershed plan and let the regulatory agencies work on the phase 2 WIP, because the difference between a voluntary program and a regulatory program might be fine but significant. And last slide, there's a lot of numbers on this slide. What this shows is the cost to implement the required nutrient reductions for 60% of the county. This is straight out of our EPA 319 watershed plan, and we estimate that if you were to add the remaining 40%, the total cost for implementation for Caroline County would be about $125 million. And you saw Mr. Bowen's presentation, which was significantly larger than that, and I think that really speaks to the difference in cost of agricultural BMPs, where you will get a far greater bang for the buck. Not that you should pick on ag, but we can look to ag to help us, as opposed to urban BMPs. In our case, a new wastewater treatment facility alone is $25 million. We're looking at one more down the road. So probably half of our cost is in 2 wastewater treatment facilities. And I think that is all I have.
Thank you very much, Deb. Our next speaker will be Leslie Middleton, designer. We're based in Virginia.
Good morning. I'm the executive director of the Rivanna River Basin Commission, and when we first proposed having a pilot project, it was proposed as a watershed-based pilot project. The commission is an entity of local government, is comprised of elected officials from 4 different municipalities and participation by the overlapping soil and water conservation districts. One of the very first things that happened, however, was that as a way to bring in other partners, we immediately expanded to include the entire planning district, which is larger than the Rivanna watershed by about 2. Rivanna watershed is about 760 square miles. And you're going to hear about a process-oriented, a stakeholder engagement oriented pilot project. I cannot give you numbers because that's not the direction that we went, but I think we learned a lot along the way, so I'm going to share some of that with you. This gives you a feel for the area that we're talking about. Charlottesville is, of course, Charlottesville-Albemarle is the urban area. We have 2 MS4 communities. There are a total of 6 phase 2 MS4 permits in that entire region. Only 1 significant discharger. We drain almost entirely in this planning district, which is the lower slide, to the Middle James. However, almost all of Louisa County goes to the York, and a significant portion of Greene County goes to the Rappahannock. So when we're looking at this as a possible regional response in the phase 2 WIPs, we're dealing with the 3 major tributaries, or 3 of the 4 major tributaries that Virginia drains to. Our process was really oriented towards local government. And our first and last inclination was to do what we could to reach out to elected officials who we knew were going to be bombarded as time went on by their constituencies about this Bay TMDL. So the way we fashioned the pilot project was we crafted a series of focus groups. We started with elected officials and their staff back in July. Then we moved through focus groups for each of the stakeholder groups as we defined them, and you can see them listed there. Not necessarily the way another region might define them, but this is partly for efficiency. Ag, forestry, and viticulture, builders and developers, and members of local economic partnerships, all of the permit holders, whether it was wastewater treatment or MS4, and then the elected officials we considered a stakeholder in that. That is where the rubber is going to hit the road, particularly in terms of the urban response to the Bay TMDL. All of the meetings that we had took place during the time of hard work on the part of EPA and the states, and also moving goalposts. So the draft TMDL and the draft WIP were being prepared as we went through these focus groups. We particularly chose people, these were not public meetings, we particularly chose people who we knew were not part of the choir. We chose people to be part of these who, however, we knew would bring other viewpoints and would talk to us honestly, and I think that that was very key in starting to build the trust and the relationships. Our goal was to get as good information out as possible. We also wanted to hear back, so that as we look at these phase 2 WIP processes, whether it happens at the local level or more regional, we understand what the real concerns are. They aren't necessarily different than what we've all heard at the public meetings, but these are our neighbors, and that's where the real conversation is going to go on. So we wanted to establish that as a foundation. The messages are not surprising. Good information, accurate, timely. Let us craft our own local response, use local data, and obviously concerns about costs. For local government, in these economic times, as any, the real question is, what are we going to be required to do? Being above the fall line, I would say, for many, many people, the Bay is not a compelling issue. It's really important in our conversations, at least where we live, that we talk about our existing waters, and we are fortunate to have a number of healthy waters. So our message also has to do with recognizing those waters that are still in very good shape and putting whatever additional protection is needed on those healthy waters as a way to meet the regulatory requirements by not further degrading those streams. Yes. Some observations about process. Engagement is difficult when the information is constantly changing. I think we all know that, but when you're talking to elected officials and you're constantly saying, well, that hasn't been decided yet, that kind of undermines one's credibility when we're operating at that level. So that's not pointing fingers at anybody, it's just a reality of what the process is like, but it's something to try and manage, as well as misinformation. That's very time consuming. Information has to be customized for different sectors. The builders look at the question from a certain kind of bottom line. The ag folks look at it from their own bottom line. It looks like acres. And trying to customize the way you actually even present a pie chart or, you know, the terminology is exceedingly important. We found that the way we tried to handle that was when we did these focus groups, we recruited somebody of the stakeholder group in and of themselves to facilitate the discussion. It wasn't those of us from the agencies or local government saying, well, what do you think? It was actually a respected builder, and in another case, a retired extension agent talking to the farmers, and we found that very effective. Moving on to phase 2, I guess what I would also say is about this is local governments are, elected officials are being struck by so many different kinds of needs, from affordable housing to water quality to transportation needs. Now, many of these things are interrelated, so part of our task is to relate them for our elected officials so that we can come in with a common language. But to a certain degree, it's whoever squawks loudest. We talked a lot in our group about fashioning a regional response. I would say there is a fair amount of interest in bringing together the 5 counties and the municipality so that we can look at questions about offsets and trading within our own watersheds and sub-watersheds indeed, so that we're not farming our pollution out to another region, that we're handling our own issues. With respect to what's coming next, these are the kinds of things that I think, at least in our region, that we need. We really need a uniform accounting system for existing practices, and one that utilizes a common definition of BMP efficiencies. And this tool needs to work for the local government that has 2 staff people who handle everything having to do with erosion and sediment control and planning, and we have one of those governments in our region, to a larger county like Albemarle who has 50 staff people who address these kinds of issues. It's got to be user-friendly, and it has got to crosswalk with the Bay TMDL models. Otherwise, we're undermining the process of engagement at local level, and the numbers really aren't meaningful. We have to establish really clear baseline conditions that are in the language of the local governments and the agencies, soil and water conservation districts that are working locally. We have to find a way to communicate how the Bay model relates to local water quality. We have to provide assurances to people who, particularly upstream, that their existing TMDLs that are being written as we speak are going to count for and be implemented as part of this Bay TMDL. We also need to use local data, whether that be land use data or water quality data, and we need to engage our local governments in verification of practices and of progress. And that's all I have to say this morning right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. And our last speaker will be Matt Royer from Pennsylvania to talk about the One Pennsylvania pilot project. Thanks, Matt.
Morning. Down here from the headwaters up in Pennsylvania, headwaters of the Bay watershed. I'm actually a resident of the Conewaga Creek watershed. Was raised there on a small farm, and delighted to be working with a whole series of partners on a collaborative approach within our watershed. And I want to just talk a little bit about some of the approaches that we've taken to date It's an ongoing initiative, and largely some ideas and thoughts on engagement, like we just heard from Leslie. This is just to get you oriented. The Conewaga Creek watershed's in south central Pennsylvania. It's in parts of 3 different counties. Lancaster is on the is just kind of the southern tip there. Also includes parts of Lebanon County. That's where its headwaters are, and southern part of Dauphin County, which is the county where our state capital, Harrisburg, is. And it's a small watershed, about 50 square miles, and is a direct tributary to the Susquehanna River. That's the large blue water body you see there on the left. Largely an agricultural watershed. We're kind of uniquely nestled between some larger urban areas and ultra-suburban areas of Lancaster and Harrisburg and Lebanon. So there's a lot of open space, a lot of elbow room yet in the watershed, and a lot of active farming that goes on. The green you see is kind of a forest cover land use, and then we do have some areas of rural residential, light industrial, and some heavier development as well. Back about 9 years ago, helped get a watershed group started for the Conewaga, and in the early years, we got hooked up with the Section 319 program, and we did a watershed implementation plan with 319 funds, and identified 129 priority projects across the watershed on our agricultural lands. So we had a plan in place kind of early on in the watershed group, kind of a typical watershed group for Pennsylvania, small, handful of good dedicated volunteers. We were implementing projects piece by piece, and realized that, man, if we're going to get 129 projects done in the watershed, we got to start partnering a little bit and working with others. But we had a project or two going in the ground. The other thing about that plan, just to backtrack, the 129 projects are focused mainly on the agricultural lands, because we're an ag impaired watershed. We actually have a local TMDL that allocates all the reductions to ag. That's not to say we don't have other sources. So this is in a lot of ways an incomplete watershed implementation plan, and that's part of what we're trying to do, is kind of complete that circle and round out a more robust local watershed implementation plan. So yeah, we were talking about the need to partner, and a lot of other organization and entities, agencies were luckily having the same kind of conversations. In 2008, Penn State Cooperative Extension put together a grant proposal to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and was awarded one of the NIFWIF Innovative Sediment Nutrient Reduction Pollution Grants in 2009 to pool resources in this collaboration, build these partnerships, and try to say, look, if we can put our finger on one spot in Pennsylvania where we all worked together and got the job done, what would that look like? So we started building these partnerships, and this has been going on for a number of years, really, with local county conservation districts really at the lead in working proactively in the agricultural sector. We have state organizations and agencies, the state DEP, federal NRCS, regional organizations like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, et cetera, in this kind of multi-partner approach. And really taking a kind of a 4-pronged approach: people, practices, place, impact. The people is increasing the outreach engagement in the community. And that'll lead to getting people excited about clean water, saying, yeah, I want to do something on my land to improve clean water. And that leads to practices. So that's really trying to create the interest in the community that we can kind of feed the technical assistance end of things to get practices on the ground. Place is really about defining place in terms of the value of those practices that go onto your landscape. So that's developing tools, education tools about ecosystem services and opportunities to take advantage there. And then impact is building a monitoring program so we can track our results. Whoops, what did I just do? I went the wrong way. So we kind of backtracked in the last couple months, said we'll start with the most important partners of all, the watershed community. And we worked with the community to kind of build a vision for the watershed that was really a strategic planning in a way, but say, like, look into this, you live here, you've lived here all your life, look ahead 10, 15 years. What is your watershed? What do you want your watershed to look like? And then build an action plan for getting there. And we started with one of the most important tools in the toolbox, pancakes. We had a pancake breakfast this summer that the local fire company put on for us. People came out, what's this Conawaga thing? What's going on here? And we started getting the word out. We brought this, I tote this ridiculous old USGS topo map that's taped together of the watershed that it first created when we started the watershed, and the tape's actually getting faded and everything already. But we said, put a pin where you live in the watershed, and that really kind of created a sense of place. And from that breakfast, we recruited a bunch of local folks to serve on a vision team, and local landowner hosted a cookout in the summer, and we started this visioning process. And we were able to build, I think, a really neat vision for the watershed where folks were like, they want clean water, they also want the farmers to keep farming, they want productive farmland, they want a beautiful place and a great place to live, work, and play. So we actually produced, one of our partners is Penn State Public Broadcasting, produced a really neat video. It's up on YouTube. If you throw Conawaga Creek into YouTube, you can check it out. That kind of is a video version of our vision. And that's kind of going to create the blueprint for moving forward, not only of what projects we want to have get in the ground, we kind of have that with the WIP, but how do we get people excited about clean water, use it as a recruiting tool. So that's ongoing. At the same time, we were working with the conservation districts in the lead, those that have the point of entry to the farm community, and where there might be someone else, like a local watershed group representative might know farmer personally. It's the person who has that contact and that point of entry, who kind of does the initial point of communication with the farmer. The districts actually moved forward and did farm surveys of every farm in the watershed, over 200 farms, to try to get a baseline of where the farms were with conservation practices, to get those farmers to get credit for the voluntary BMPs they put in the ground that haven't been tracked. Same thing that Kathleen had mentioned. Also ask the farmers, hey, if you're interested in doing more, right now we can help you. So we have a list of those that want more technical assistance, strike while the iron's hot. And then finally we can use that information to figure out who's not in compliance with existing state environmental laws as they relate to agriculture. We have very robust environmental laws related to agriculture. They've just never been enforced for decades. We have a compliance issue, not necessarily a legal issue. And that's actually a big part of the state WIP in Pennsylvania. So our goal in our watershed is to get 100% compliance with those laws across the board, every farm in the watershed. So we have a list of the farmers that aren't in compliance, and we're going to work with conservation districts farmer by farmer to try to get there. Of course, starting with those that aren't going to meet you at the door with a shotgun or anything like that. Start with those we think we can can come around. The other piece that we're really using some of the EPA supported funding. We're working with Tetra Tech to kind of round out that watershed implementation plan. Realize that it's not all ag. We've got stormwater sources as well. So Tetra Tech's helping us take a look at the stormwater inputs in the watershed and develop some priority projects for addressing those. And we're just kind of, as part of the initiative, in the early stages of developing this, what we're calling our non-ag program. We got to come up with a much better name than that. But working with the residents in the community, municipalities, businesses on the other sources. Because that's something we hear from the farm community a lot, is what are you doing with the homeowners that over-fertilize their lawns, et cetera. And developing a program of education outreach with that is very important. So I'll just leave you with our vision statement from the vision team. The Conawaga watershed community has envisioned a future that establishes the restored Conawaga and its tributaries as a centerpiece of pride and a treasured asset in a rural landscape. This vision includes a strong agricultural community and productive farmland, community recreation areas, and vibrant, well-planned communities. Pristine landscapes will be protected while providing sustainable uses of natural resources, clean water and streams, and educational opportunities for generations to come. And man, if we can get to that, I think we'll meet our goals. Thank you.
and thanks to all the panelists. I think Congressman Cummings would be very proud of you. I didn't see any pity party professionals there. They're all looking at the challenge and moving forward. As diverse and varied as the pilots were, and I think that will bode well for us as we move forward. I heard a lot of common themes there as well in terms of, it's all about, really your local streams, rivers, and creeks that'll ultimately help the bay, but we've got to think local as we move forward. Any tools we develop have to be tools that can be used at the local level. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. We got folks with a couple of mics, and let's get started. We've got about 10 minutes here.
I have a question for Matt. What percentage of the farmers are plain sect, and what's your plan for outreach to them?
Right. We actually are a little bit outside of the real heavy plain sect population of Lancaster County, although we do have a few. There's a handful of plain sect farmers in our watershed. And we're again relying on the conservation districts in the lead. They are working with some of those plain sect and plain sect farmers and kind of taking it step by step. Where I know one farmer in particular was interested in a particular BMP, where there probably are some other higher priority BMPs on that farm that we'd like to see be implemented in terms of the water quality benefits. But let's start where we can and develop that relationship, good working relationship. We found that some of the plain sect, the use of government funds is an issue, but for others it's not. It really is very dependent on the church and the bishop and how just the relationship the farmer has within that community. So there are opportunities to take advantage of funds there, and we're just kind of taking it one step at a time kind of approach. But we're lucky there that we don't have a very large mass, critical mass to work with.
Yes.
I have two questions for Ron Bowen. Hi, Ron. One is, you had a price tag of $1.87 billion when you added up everything that needed to be done. And so the first question is about where you're going to get the money to pay for that. And the second question is about, you talked briefly about a innovative stream restoration technique, and I'm curious about the costs for that. Is part of the reason you're doing it is that it's more cost effective, and do you have like a per mile cost on it?
I'll page to some of the statistics on that. Hopefully I can find them. All right, now the first part of your question again was, yeah, the one point, where are we going to find the money? Well, I guess, that's yet to be determined. I guess the analogy that I've shared with others, because when you look at numbers that size, you say to yourself, well, it's just absolutely impossible. There's no way. But I guess one example that I've lived for the almost 28 years that I've been with Anne Arundel County, when I was first employed there, the county executive that was elected at that time was elected on the basis of turning around the debt-ridden water and sewer operation within the county, which was part of its public works organization. Those systems were considered the worst in all of the state of Maryland at that time. And I know, without having gone back and adding up all of the expenses that we've incurred, we have easily expended easily have expended $2 billion on that kind of infrastructure over all that time. At the same time, we had solid waste facilities, at least one of them was on a Superfund list, equally as driven into the ground as far as you could drive a solid waste organization. And that's been turned around into state of the art. We've spent probably $600-700 million in doing stuff as it relates to that. So I guess my point is, back when these enterprise funds were being created for the water and sewer operation as well as the solid waste operation, folks would cry and explain that there's absolutely no way they could afford to solve this problem. There's just no way. But 28 years later, somehow we've found a way to fund that through basically collecting fees and charges from the users of those systems. So I guess conceptually what the challenge we have at a political level is to recognize and realize that the only way we're going to solve these problems as it relates to these non-point source issues is to look at it very similar to the way solid waste enterprise funds and water and sewer enterprise funds are formed. You have to develop a dedicated revenue stream that can't be rated for other purposes and directly focused on addressing the issue. I could go on and on as it relates to the infrastructure within our roadway systems and storm drain systems. The next county executive, he wants to campaign on the promise of turning around that deteriorating infrastructure that is falling apart as bad as our water and sewer systems were 28 years ago. There's plenty of opportunity there if they want to take that on. The backlog of work that needs to be done is just astronomical, and it just keeps growing year after year. And it's another one that the only way it's going to get addressed is dedicate a revenue stream specifically focused at it and address the issue. Yeah, the innovative stream restoration, and once again, it would take some time and some slides to help you fully understand what's going on there. But as I very quickly, as I rattled off my 5-minute time frame there, you know, it's a process of refilling those voids like you saw in the picture. You're actually refilling those voids with mixture sand and wood chips. And the way these things are designed, there are parabolic weir structures that are strategically placed through the length of the stream section itself. These parabolic weir structures are created out of native boulders, sandstone kind of boulders that we have throughout the county. They're designed, as I pointed out earlier, to contain within the weir structure itself the 100-year storm event. Larger storm events, if they get beyond those rock structures, they have the potential of eroding around the outside and deteriorating. But if you can keep it contained within the rock structures, the way they manage the water through the system, they maintain the invert. The other aspect of this is when we refill those voids with the sand and wood chips, a very significant amount of groundwater flow is taking place through that media in and of itself. And a number of, we actually use the same technique for the outfall reconstruction that we're pursuing. And when we do that for piped outfalls, almost all storm events are actually conveyed through those outfall systems as shallow groundwater. It's only in the very large storm events where you actually get a surface flow that in some cases can be a torrent of water down through those things as they get down a fairly steep slope. But containing that 100-year storm with those weir structures, you'll maintain grade control. You'll provide all the hydrology back into the floodplain areas. And that's another thing to understand. Where we have these severely eroded stream systems, we've lost literally several thousand acres of forested wetland area, floodplain area, that otherwise at one time was providing a lot of work that Mother Nature can offer, though it has been lost when these streams no longer use those floodplains. So restoring these things, putting them back in their floodplain, you put all of those many acres of hydric soils back into work for you also. So that's a real quick summary of it. But I can guarantee you, if we don't address those erosion problems in the stream systems within Anne Arundel County, there is no way we'll meet the Bay TMDL as it relates to the sediment impairment. Another aspect of this is to know that these soils that are being eroded out of these systems have been sequestering phosphorus for a lot of years. When you start putting that soil back into the water column, some of that phosphorus is coming back to the water column also, so that's going to be a major issue in terms of the phosphorus impact. So stream systems are a major issue. If we don't address them, we'll never meet the Bay TMDL, and we'll never meet our individual watershed TMDLs, which we have many impairments, some of which have been promulgated in individual TMDLs. If we're successful at meeting the Bay TMDL, at the end of that day, we'll still have a litany of local TMDLs that will require additional work and additional reduction.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, Tom Shore with the Chesapeake Stormwater Network. This is to whoever wants to handle it. As you were doing your pilot plans, what data did you have the least confidence in? The cost data or the removal data? Or did you feel like you had enough confidence in that data to make good planning decisions?
I can start. This also speaks to one of the biggest challenges, at least in Caroline County. We have the least confidence in any agricultural BMP data. And the reason for that is not that the data that's out there isn't good, but we don't have access to any of the data. So we are relying on soil, if we pick say a 10 square mile area, we have to ask the Soil Conservation District what BMPs are there and what are the reductions you're getting. They'll say these 10 BMPs are there, you're getting 10% reduction, and that is all we're allowed to see. So it's not that I think they're being dishonest, I don't, but there's nothing to tell us whether or not it's accurate or if it's not accurate. So that's just from Caroline County.
Verna? Well, one of the things we're planning on doing, and Leslie addressed this a little bit in terms of what tools we can get out there to provide to folks, there's something called Scenario Builder. That's the interface tool with the watershed model that we use to feed the BMPs into to get the efficiencies to figure out if the load reductions are being achieved. And right now there's 2 people in the world who know how to run Scenario Builder, and that's not going to work when we get down to the local level, obviously. So we're in the process of developing an internet-based user interface for Scenario Builder, which we hope to have out sometime this spring, fingers crossed. That will actually, it won't go 100% the way the actual Scenario Builder model would go, but it would enable folks at state and local level to actually perform some of those preliminary estimations with BMP efficiencies on your own. We're also planning on putting on training as well for state and local folks beginning this spring into the summer. So there'll be hands-on training to go along with the tool itself. So those are some of the types of things we can do, and that'll help with folks, at least at the local level, seeing if they can build greater reasonable assurance in plans. Right, and Verna's raising her favorite issue of verification, which we understand and are very sensitive to. There's also been some discussion of this Bay tracking and accounting system that we have under development, which we have to have out by the end of this month, according to the CBF settlement. We're well on track to do that. I mentioned to a couple of people yesterday, we've actually added a field in that tracking system that will only give you so much credit for your BMPs based on the rigor and the amount of verification you do of those practices. So there's an actual column with percentage, and here's what the efficiency is, and if you do no verification at BMP, you will get 0 credit towards that, and that's something we will be working with the states and locals as well. But I mean, the verification component is something we're totally planning on taking into account as we move into phase 2.
If I can take a second to throw out a vote as it relates to what we should be monitoring. One of the things that I've mentioned in the presentation was that all of our, a very substantial portion of our stream systems are biologically impaired. And the way we're trying to organize ourselves around how to know whether or not we're getting the job done, we want to focus on the biological integrity of those stream systems. We want to monitor, are we successful in restoring those stream systems to where we start to see the life coming back within them. So we think that's really only the true measure. And if we're accomplishing that within these non-tidal stream systems, they're going to be delivering quality water to the Chesapeake Bay, which is where it has to happen first. It has to happen in these headwater stream systems.
Thank you, Ron. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut off the Q&A right now. I encourage you to approach the panel members. We're running about a half hour behind schedule, and I've gotten 2 or 3 of these, X marks, and Hillary's, very anxiously sitting here. So thank you, everyone. Please, once again, thank our panelists for a wonderful job.
What a mix.
I also wanted to thank all the panelists. They all traveled significant distances to be here today, and so if you can grab them. I have a couple quick announcements. If everybody could just sit tight for a sec.
If you...
we are running a little bit late, so I'm going to ask everyone to move pretty quickly. I also have a quick reminder about evaluations because we want to know what your thoughts are about the conference, the facility, the program. So please fill those out and get them to the main desk. We're also probably going to move the conference out of DC next year. And if you want the conference in your backyard, this is your chance to make a pitch for your water body. So please do that. We've got some great breakout sessions that are starting now. So please choose one and move to that location. Marcellus Shale gas drilling will be in this room because it's going to be live stream. So if you are interested in the Marcellus Shale program, you're going to stay right here. That means everybody else is going to head out to the other breakouts. We have one on federal appropriations that's going to be right directly across. One on Great Waters, which is also going to be just across the room. And then we have a great session on diversity in the clean water movement. We also will have innovation lunch, and so please plan to be back here at noon. Thank you very much.
Was that you clapping? Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Mark.
Well, so my question is